You ever see something so unbelievable, so far out of the ordinary that your brain just freezes? That's what happened to three firefighters in Ashford, Tennessee, just after sunrise on a chilly October morning. They were sipping burnt coffee out of paper cups when a massive German shepherd limped out of the woods, bleeding and caked in soot with something clutched in his jaws. At first, they thought it was a torn piece of clothing, or worse, maybe roadkill, but then the shape shifted in the early light. A tiny arm, a tangle of hair, a face. It was a little girl wrapped inside a scorched tactical K9 vest. She dangled limp in the dog's jaws, her face pale, blood trickling from her temple, a swollen ankle barely hanging in her soaked sneaker. The dog, tongue dragging and ribs poking through dirty fur, climbed the last few feet to the firehouse steps and laid her down as gently as if she were made of glass. Then he collapsed. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was like time cracked open. And in that moment, no one could have guessed the miles his dog had walked, the nightmare he'd survived, or the secret he was still carrying. The firehouse sprang into action. EMTs swarmed the girl, calling out vitals. One firefighter knelt by the German shepherd, his gloved hands hovering, unsure whether to touch. The dog was still breathing, but barely. "Get animal control," someone shouted. But an older paramedic shook his head. "Forget animal control. That dog just saved her life." The little girl was around 8. She had no ID, no phone, no backpack, just dirt and smoke in her clothes and a name she mumbled once just before passing out. Duke. One of the firefighters turned. "That the girl's name?" The paramedic shook his head slowly. "No, that's the dog's. Ashford is a small place. You don't just find a half-dead war dog dragging a bleeding child into town without people asking questions. And boy, did they. The girl was rushed to the regional hospital. Multiple bruises, lacerations, mild smoke inhalation, early hypothermia, a sprained ankle, but she was alive. The doctors called a miracle. Duke the dog was taken to the nearest veterinary ER, where the staff worked in stunned silence. His paws were shredded. He had cuts down his flank and signs of severe exhaustion. And the vest he was wearing, it belonged to a retired K9 unit out of Monroe County, almost 47 miles away. The math didn't make sense. A wounded dog carrying a child alone through forests, roadways, and God knows what else. "Impossible," the vet whispered, bandaging Duke's feet. "Completely impossible." Let's pause right here. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that animals can be heroes in ways we can't even understand, take a second right now and subscribe to Heroes for Animals. These aren't just stories. They're reminders of what loyalty, courage, and heart really look like. Back at the hospital, the little girl began to speak, but only in short whispers. She didn't remember how she got there. She didn't know where her parents were. All she could say again and again was, "Duke came back." By that point, investigators were already trying to piece together the trail. It started with a burned-out cabin deep in Monroe County, reported days earlier ruled a tragic accident. 3 presumed dead, no survivors. They'd only pulled out 2 adult bodies. No one noticed a child was missing until Duke walked into Ashford. They dug deeper. The vest Duke wore was scanned and traced back to a decommissioned K9 named Duke, once part of the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. He'd been retired a year ago after what was described in paperwork as a critical field disobedience. The exact file was redacted. They said Duke disobeyed a direct order during a domestic abuse case involving a former deputy. Duke attacked a man who technically hadn't drawn a weapon. The man filed suit. Duke was pulled from duty. But the firefighter vet in Ashford, who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, said something else. A dog doesn't attack for no reason. Not a dog like this. He knew something. More pieces fell into place. The girl's name was Leah Carson. Her parents, David and Marlene Carson, were freelance journalists who had recently gone off-grid to investigate a cold case tied to old corruption in Monroe County. Their names had been on the lease for the cabin that burned. Someone had set that fire. And the night of the blaze, Duke, retired, given to a friend of the Carsons, was there. He'd survived, and so had Leah. But that still left the biggest question. How did Duke get her out? And how did they make it nearly 50 miles through Tennessee wilderness? injured, alone, and hunted. No GPS, no trail markers, no food, only instincts. Witnesses along the route. Some hadn't even come forward until the news aired. The story began to report strange sightings. A massive dog crossing a river with a bundle in its mouth. A figure resting in a ditch under a bus shelter. A gas station security camera showed a flash of fur as something darted behind the dumpsters. They were ghosts on the wind. But the final piece of the story came from Leah herself. After she saw Duke awake for the first time, he had been stabilized, thin, stitched, but alive. When Leah walked into the room, she didn't cry. She saluted him, and then she told the story. Leah didn't speak much when the reporters first showed up. She didn't respond to the flashing cameras or the volunteers offering stuffed animals. But when she saw Duke again, awake, bandaged, resting on a blanket in the corner of the vet hospital, something inside her unlocked. She walked over quietly, knelt down, and whispered, "I told you we'd make it." Then she turned to the sheriff and said, "I can tell you everything now." The Carsons hadn't gone into hiding for fun. Leia's parents had been investigating something dark, something dangerous. An old missing persons case involving 3 teenagers who vanished in the late 1990s near Monroe County. Everyone had assumed it was drugs or maybe a runaway situation, but Marlene had been digging into police archives for months and found discrepancies in the initial reports, locations that didn't match, testimonies that had been altered. The deeper they looked, the more they uncovered. Ties to a former deputy. Evidence that was supposed to be destroyed. They moved into the cabin to avoid being tracked. It was remote, isolated, safe, until it wasn't. Leah remembered the night it happened. Her dad was on the phone in the kitchen. Her mom had her laptop open with maps and photos spread out across the table. Duke was lying beside Leia's bed upstairs, twitching in his sleep like dogs do when they dream. Then came the knock at the door. A man's voice, calm, confident. "David, it's me. Just want to talk." Leah peeked from the stairs and saw her dad freeze. His hand trembled on the receiver. He didn't open the door. Then the window shattered. She remembered her mom screaming, grabbing the USB drive and shoving it into Leia's coat pocket. "If anything happens to us," Marlene whispered, gripping Leia's shoulders, "you run. Do you hear me? You find help. And you trust Duke. Only Duke." Seconds later, fire exploded through the back wall. The curtains ignited. The smoke alarms wailed. Leah couldn't breathe. She didn't remember running. She didn't remember falling out the back door or crawling through the pine needles. She remembered Duke, his jaws locked around the collar of her jacket, dragging her away from the flames step by step. Even as the sky behind them turned orange and black. That's how the journey started. Leah was barefoot. Her ankle twisted when she stumbled down a rocky slope behind the house. Duke nudged her up. When she passed out, he waited. When she cried, he licked the tears off her cheek. He carried her literally when she couldn't go on. They avoided main roads. Duke somehow knew which directions to take, skirting human contact, slipping through ravines and creeks, sleeping under bridge overpasses, hiding when headlights came near. "I don't know how he did it," Leah told the sheriff. "I just held onto his vest and tried not to faint." It took them 4.5 days to get to Ashford. The USB drive, miraculously, was still in Leia's pocket, and inside it was the truth. The files revealed that the Carsons had uncovered a hidden network of cover-ups involving several cold cases, and a man named Franklin Dale, a former Monroe County deputy turned local businessman. He owned construction companies, financed elections, donated to charity drives. People saw him as a community pillar, but the files told a different story. He had tampered with evidence in multiple missing person investigations. One girl's backpack was found and never logged. Another cell phone had GPS data scrubbed. And the most damning piece, a scanned letter written by one of the missing teens, dated just 2 days before she disappeared. It said, "If anything happens to me, tell the world." It was Deputy Dale. The sheriff in Ashford, Ron McKay, a Vietnam vet with a no BS attitude, took one look at the drive and made a decision that would change everything. He called the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and this time, no one could shut it down. The investigation that followed was one of the biggest the region had seen in decades. Franklin Dale denied everything, of course, claimed the USB was forged, that the Carsons had doctored the files, that it was all a smear campaign. But tech experts verified the metadata. The timestamps, the emails, the cross-reference photos from the 1990s match locations Dale had worked at, properties he owned, construction sites he managed. Then a break came in the form of Duke's old handler. His name was Paul Granger. He showed up at the Ashford precinct with a file of his own. "I trained Duke," he said, "and I know what really happened when they retired him." Paul explained that Duke had been on a domestic call with Deputy Dale nearly a year ago. There was a woman and child involved. The situation turned ugly. Dale told Duke to stand down, but the dog lunged anyway. He bit Dale hard enough to fracture his wrist. Duke was labeled unstable and discharged. But Paul had always suspected something was off. That dog doesn't snap. He senses intent. If he bit Dale, it's because he knew. Now, with Leia's story in the USB files, everything came together. The girl Duke tried to protect back then, she and her mother had vanished months later. Another cold case. Franklin Dale was arrested and charged of obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and suspicion of involvement in 3 disappearances. But the case was far from over. Investigators reopened 7 cold files connected to Monroe County. 2 new bodies were recovered in an abandoned septic system on land formerly owned by Dale's company. Forensic analysis matched DNA from one of the girls reported missing in 1998. The media called it the Monroe murders, but in Ashford, people called it something else: Duke's Justice. In the months that followed, Leia stayed in Ashford under protective custody. Sheriff McKay and his wife, unable to have children of their own, offered to foster her. She started school again. She got a new backpack, a library card. Her favorite subject became U.S. history. And Duke became a legend. He recovered slowly with the help of every kid in town, bringing him treats and handmade get-well cards. The vet staff said he had the heart of a lion and the soul of a saint. The town built him a small monument in front of the firehouse, a bronze statue of German shepherds standing tall, nose pointed toward the woods. And every year on the anniversary of his walk, Ashford holds a candlelight walk called the Long Road. It's not just about Duke. It's about remembering that sometimes the smallest voices, the ones no one listens to, carry the biggest truths. One day, a news crew came to do a follow-up story. They asked Leia what she remembered most. She didn't talk about the fire or the fear or the man at the door. She said, "I remember Duke pushing me forward when I wanted to stop. I remember thinking, if he's not giving up, then neither am I." Then she smiled and added, "He's not just my dog. He's the reason I'm here." The courthouse in Monroe County had never seen anything like it. People lined the sidewalks with coffee and blankets at 6 a.m., waiting to get inside. Reporters from Nashville, Atlanta, even as far as Chicago, had staked out corners of the courthouse lawn. Some sat on lawn chairs with satellite dishes pointing skyward. Others filmed TikToks and live streams narrating the story that had become a national obsession. The trial of Franklin Dale and the testimony of a little girl and the dog who carried her through hell. Inside courtroom 2B, tension hung like thick humidity. Prosecutors called it a fight for justice. The defense claimed it was a circus, but everyone in town knew what it really was. It was Duke's day. Franklin Dale sat at the defense table in a sharp gray suit, his graying hair neatly combed, fingers steepled like a preacher. His face didn't twitch, not when his charges were read, not even when Leia Carson walked through double doors with Sheriff McKay at her side. She was wearing a blue dress. It matched her eyes, and she was holding Duke's leash. A collective hush fell over the courtroom. Duke walked at her side, strong again, his fur glossy, his gait proud. He wore his black K9 vest, not because he had to, but because the moment called for it. The judge nodded solemnly. "You may proceed." Leia took the stand first. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't fidget. She sat up straight and answered every question from the prosecution. How the fire started, how her parents screamed, how Duke dragged her out of the smoke and through the dark. "I was ready to give up," she said, staring out into the rows of suits and notebooks. "But Duke didn't, and that's why I'm here." Then came the cross-examination. The defense attorney, a polished man in a $3,000 suit, tried to chip away at her memory, asked why she waited days to talk, suggested her fear distorted the truth. You said you saw Mr. Dale through the window, he said, voice syrupy. But how can you be so sure? There was smoke, panic. You're just a child. Leia blinked. I know what I saw. I saw him. I heard his voice. And Duke saw him, too. The room froze. It was subtle, but Dale's hands clenched just once, barely enough to notice. The judge called for a short recess. That's when the prosecution team made a bold request. They wanted to submit Duke's behavior as evidence, not his words. Obviously, he was a dog, not a witness, but his trained actions, his identification response, his consistent reaction. When shown Dale's photo, Duke, a certified K-9 with military and law enforcement training, demonstrated situational recognition, defensive loyalty, and behavioral consistency in line with his past service. The lead prosecutor argued, he's demonstrated situational recognition, defensive loyalty, and behavioral consistency in line with his past service. The judge leaned back. You want the dog to take the stand? No, Your Honor, the prosecutor replied. We want the jury to see what he does when he's in the presence of the man who hurt that child. They brought Duke into the box. Dale stayed seated at the defense table, expression unreadable. Duke was led in by Officer Granger, his former handler, and placed near the stand. Then, without command or prompting, Granger walked Duke past the jury, past the bailiff, and stopped 10 feet from Dale. Silence. Duke's ears perked up. His tail stiffened. His posture shifted from relaxed to alert. Then a low growl, guttural and primal, rumbled in his throat. The bailiff stepped forward. Control your dog. But Granger shook his head. He's not attacking. He's identifying. Duke took 2 steps toward Dale. No bark, no lunge, just a kind of cold, lock stare only war dogs know how to give. The jury leaned forward. A few gasped. Even the judge narrowed his eyes. Noted, he said. And just like that, Duke became the trial's most powerful voice without speaking a single word. In the days that followed, the courtroom heard from tech analysts, forensic scientists, and behavioral psychologists. They confirmed the content of the Carson USB drive, authenticated the documents, traced the missing person's paths to land formerly leased by Dale's company. They even unearthed an audio file, a voicemail fragment from one of the missing teens never before released. The last 3 seconds captured her sobbing in the words, "He's here." The deputy. He. The audio cut off. Dale's defense crumbled. His attorney pivoted to character testimony. They brought in community leaders, a retired judge, even his pastor. This man, the pastor said, has donated more money to youth sports than anyone I know. But the jury didn't buy it. Not after hearing Leia's voice. Not after seeing Duke sit, ears up, every time Dale entered the room. And especially not after what came next. The final day of the trial, Leia was asked if she had anything she wanted to say. Something not in her official statement. She stepped to the microphone. I'm not afraid of you anymore, she said, looking straight at Dale. You tried to make me disappear, but he, she pointed to Duke, made sure I didn't. She paused, then said something no one expected. I forgive you. Gasps rippled through the room. But I'll never forget what you did, and I hope nobody else does either. It took the jury 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Franklin Dale was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As he was escorted from the courtroom, Duke rose to his feet and stared after him until the doors closed. The nation reacted like wildfire. TV anchors cried on air. Late-night hosts dedicated monologues to the dog who wouldn't let evil win. People sent gifts to Ashford from across the country. Treats, toys, letters addressed simply to Duke Ashford TN. The governor issued a commendation. Duke was given an honorary badge and the Title K-9 officer of the state of Tennessee. He was even offered a spot in the state's Hero Animal Hall of Fame. The town held a parade. The Ashford Elementary Marching Band played God Bless America, while Leia and Duke rode in a convertible, waving to the crowd. Some kids held up signs, Duke for president. Others just ran behind the car, laughing and chanting his name. But even with all the cameras and cheers, Duke stayed the same. He still slept at the foot of Leia's bed, still barked at squirrels, still liked his water bowl cold and his naps in the sun. He wasn't in it for the fame. He was just doing what dogs do best, protecting the ones he loved. A few weeks later, Leia sat with a reporter for a documentary piece. She wore a hoodie that said Team Duke across the front. "Do you think you'll ever stop talking about what happened?" the reporter asked. Leia smiled. "No, and I hope no one else does either. Because people need to remember not just what was done to us, but how one dog walked across 47 miles of pain to save me." She looked down at Duke, resting his head on her lap. "Some people think heroes fly, or wear badges," she whispered. "Mine walks on 4 legs and has a scar under his ear. That's how I know he's real." 6 months after the trial, life in Ashford had settled. But it would never be the same. The town that once barely made the weather map was now the heart of a national conversation. And at the center of it all was a dog with a torn ear, a healed paw, and the kind of eyes that seemed to know more than most people ever would. Duke. He wasn't just a local hero anymore. He had become a symbol. It started with the mail. Every week, packages arrived at the sheriff's office. Handmade drawings from second graders in Ohio. A crocheted dog vest from a retired Navy spouse in California. Letters written in shaky cursive from elderly veterans who said they hadn't cried in years until they saw Duke on the news. One letter simply read, "He reminded me what good looks like in a world that forgot." Leia had changed, too. She was still a kid, still figuring out pre-algebra and learning how to ride a bike with no hands. But she had a sense of purpose now, something bigger than herself. It began with a school assignment. Her class had to write a persuasive essay. Most kids chose topics like longer recess or banning broccoli from the cafeteria. Leia's paper was titled, "Why Retired K-9s Deserve the Same Respect as Human Officers." She read it aloud to the class, and by the end, even the tough kid in the back had watery eyes. Her teacher sent a copy to the local paper. They published it on the front page. That same week, a state representative reached out. Her name was Cynthia Adams, a young congresswoman from Memphis with a golden retriever named Otis. She called Leia personally. "Your essay moved me, sweetheart. I'd like you to come to Nashville." Leia blinked. "Why?" "To help change the law." So that's how it happened. One chilly morning in February, Leia and Duke rode with Sheriff McKay and his wife to the Tennessee state capitol. Leia wore a navy blue dress and tiny gold earrings shaped like paw prints. Duke had a fresh vest stitched with a patch, "Honor Unit Ashford K-9. When they arrived, reporters swarmed them, but Sheriff McKay cleared a path. "She's not here for attention," he said. "She's here for justice." Inside the legislative chamber, Leia stood behind a wooden podium that looked way too big for her. But she didn't flinch. She told the story from the fire, the walk, the trial, the moment Duke faced a man who tried to erase her life. And then she said, "He didn't wear a badge anymore. He didn't get paid, but Duke still did the job. He didn't quit when it was hard. So why do we let the system quit on dogs like him?" You could hear a pin drop. The bill was called Duke's Law. It proposed official state recognition for retired K-9s, lifetime veterinary care funded by public safety grants, and legal protections equal to those of active duty service animals. Within 3 weeks, it passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. The governor signed it into law using a paw-shaped pen. Leia stood beside him. Duke sat at her side, tail thumping softly on the marble floor. That was just the beginning. Other states took notice. Mississippi drafted a similar bill, then Georgia, then Colorado. Within a year, 8 states had passed their own versions of Duke's Law. National networks started referring to the effort as the Duke movement. Late-night TV shows featured animated shorts about him. A major streaming service optioned a documentary. But the most powerful moment came not on screen, but in the dirt. A K-9 named Ranger was shot in the line of duty during a narcotics raid in Arizona. His handler, Officer Sarah Ruiz, wrote to Leia afterward, "Your story gave me the courage to fight for Ranger's medical care. The city wouldn't have paid for it before Duke's Law. Now they have to. He's alive because of you." Leia read that letter 3 times. Then she asked Sheriff McKay, Can we do more? And they did. With help from Officer Granger and donations pouring in, they founded a nonprofit, Duke's Walk. Its mission: to rescue, retrain, and rehome retired K9s across the country and provide financial aid to handlers struggling to care for their partners after service. Their motto was simple: no K9 left behind. The first dog they rehomed was a Belgian Malinois named Tango. He'd done bomb detection in New York for 6 years. After an injury, he'd been kenneled indefinitely. Leia found him a home with a veteran who had PTSD. 3 months later, the man sent a photo. Tango sleeping with his head in the vet's lap, both of them finally at peace. Leia smiled and whispered to Duke, "That's one more." Duke, now 10 years old, was slowing down. He had arthritis in his back hips and sometimes limped after long walks, but he never missed a parade, never turned down a visitor. He still barked at the mail truck and loved his peanut butter treats. And every Friday, Leia read him a letter, usually one from a kid thanking him for teaching him what bravery means. The one he seemed to like best came from a 6-year-old boy in Iowa. "When I'm scared, I think about how you walked, even when it hurt. That helps me go to school." One spring morning, Sheriff McKay came home to find Leia sitting on the porch steps. Duke lay beside her, head in her lap, breathing slow. McKay sat down quietly, said nothing. Leia looked up, eyes rimmed in red. "I think it's almost time." The vet came that evening. A gentle, kind woman who'd known Duke since his first day in Ashford. She brought a soft fleece blanket and a little biscuit for his final nap. Leia held him the whole time. "I love you," she whispered. His tail thumped once, and then he was gone. Ashford held a memorial service at the firehouse. Hundreds came, some from states away. Officers, veterans, children, K9s in uniform. They played taps. Leia gave a speech. "There are some heroes who walk into fire, others who walk into darkness. Duke walked into both for me. They buried him beneath a tree next to the statue they'd built months earlier. On the plaque, they etched 5 words: 'He walked so others lived.'" A year later, Leia visited Washington, D.C. for the National K9 Memorial Ceremony. She was asked to read the names of dogs who had died in service that year. At the end, she said, "And one more, Duke of Ashford. Not fall in the line of duty, but a warrior until the end." She stepped back from the podium. A full crowd of law enforcement officers, family members, and fellow handlers stood in silence. Then someone began to clap, and then everyone did because they knew this story wasn't just about a dog. It was about the promise that loyalty doesn't fade, that courage doesn't age, that love, especially the kind that walks on 4 legs, leaves footprints deeper than any trail through the woods. The house felt quieter without Duke. His empty bed still sat by the fireplace, untouched. His favorite chew toy, an old knotted rope, lay beside it, frayed but sacred. Sheriff McKay had offered to pack it away, but Leia wouldn't let him. "He earned his place," she said. "He stays." Everyone in Ashford gave her space. People waved gently instead of shouting across the street. Teachers gave her time when her hand hesitated to rise in class. But Leia didn't retreat. She wasn't the same little girl who'd been carried out of the woods. She was standing now, speaking, leading, and grief wasn't a weight anymore. It was a mission. It started with a middle school assembly. The principal had asked Leia if she'd be willing to speak about resilience. She hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't exactly her dream, but something inside her whispered, "He didn't walk all that way for you to stay silent." So she stood up on stage in front of 300 kids, her knees knocking behind the podium, and told the story again. Not just the fire or the trial, but the guilt that came after, the dreams where she heard him whimper and woke up in tears. The moment she'd catch herself reaching for a leash that wasn't there. She told him about love. Real love, the kind that stays. And when she was done, the whole gym clapped, not politely, but powerfully. That's when she knew Duke's legacy wasn't finished. It was just getting started. That summer, Leia launched a national school program called Duke Taught Me. It wasn't just about service dogs. It was about emotional strength, loyalty, responsibility, a way to reach kids who never had someone believe in them. The pilot began in Tennessee, but word spread fast. By the next spring, 57 schools across 6 states were participating. Teachers used Duke's story to talk about coping with trauma, setting goals, and standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. The logo was simple, a silhouette of Duke's head next to the phrase. He walked so we could grow. Leia visited every school she could. Some kids showed her drawings. Others brought letters. One child from Missouri stood up after a talk and said, "Miss Leia, my dad left, and I thought I was a reason, but now I think maybe I can keep walking too." Leia hugged her right there in the hallway. By her freshman year of high school, Leia was speaking at conferences and education panels, sharing the mic with governors and child psychologists. She still missed Duke. Some days, she swore she could hear him padding across the hardwood or feel his breath on her fingers when she reached down at night. But she carried him with her in her words, in her voice, in the people she helped until one day life threw her a test no stage could prepare for. It was a Friday afternoon when the email came. A school in Arkansas, part of the Duke Taught Me program, had experienced a shooting. 2 students were injured, 1 teacher killed. The shooter, a 14-year-old boy, quiet, isolated, bullied. His favorite book, the police later found, was Duke's Justice, a young reader's version of Duke's story. He had underlined entire pages and scribbled angry notes in the margins. Leia's name was written in Sharpie on the cover. The backlash was swift. Talk shows speculated. Had the story of a heroic dog been twisted into a call for vengeance? Had Leia's message been misinterpreted? Was it too much pressure to place on a girl who'd lived through trauma? For the first time, the country questioned her, and Leia was shaken. She didn't speak to the media, didn't leave the house for days. She stopped answering calls from schools and paused all program travel. Sheriff McKay found her one night curled up in Duke's old bed. "They think I made him do it," she whispered. "They think I turned pain into something ugly." McKay sat beside her, didn't try to fix it, just listened. Then he said quietly, "Evil isn't born from truth. It's born from silence. That boy didn't hear your voice. He only heard his own anger." Leia stayed quiet a few more days, and then on her own terms, she chose to respond. She wrote an open letter, published in every major newspaper in the country. "To anyone who feels like giving up, my story was never about revenge. It was about survival, about loyalty, about the kind of love that doesn't run. If you ever read my words and felt angry, I'm sorry, but I hope you'll listen again. Not with your fists clenched, but your heart open. Duke didn't save me so I could teach kids how to fight. He saved me so I could teach them how to heal." That letter went viral. Within days, emails poured in, not from pundits, but from kids. "I didn't know it was okay to talk about pain. Thank you for writing this. I needed it more than you know. I was angry, but now I think I was just scared." Leia read every single one. Then she reopened Duke Taught Me with a new curriculum focused on emotional literacy, mental health, and safe expression. She partnered with school counselors and trauma experts to revise everything. This time, it wasn't just a story, it was a lifeline. Years passed. Leia graduated with honors, delivering her valedictorian speech with Duke's old tag around her neck. She went on to college, majoring in psychology with a minor in animal science. She started training therapy dogs, partnering them with survivors of abuse and children in foster care. And on her 22nd birthday, she returned to Ashford Elementary to speak to a new group of first graders. They didn't remember the fire or the trial or the courtrooms, but they knew Duke. His statue still stood near the school garden, covered in flowers and toy bones. Leia stood beneath it and said, "He didn't save me to make me famous. He saved me so I could save others." A little boy raised his hand and asked, "Do you miss him?" Leia smiled, eyes glassy. "Every day, but he's still walking with me, just in a different way now." The day Leia stood beneath the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. felt strangely still. Hundreds of people had gathered, police officers in dress uniforms, children in matching school T-shirts, service dog handlers with vests reading retirement unit. The walls echoed with quiet reverence. Leia adjusted the mic. She was 26 now, Older, wiser, stronger. Her black blazer had a tiny bronze pin on the lapel, a dog's paw etched with the initials DK9. Behind her, projected on a massive white backdrop, was a photo of Duke, not the war hero version in armor, just a real one, lie on a wooden porch, tongue lolling, tail mid-wag, at peace. She took a breath and began. I used to think stories ended when someone died, she said. I thought Duke's last walk was the final chapter, but I was wrong. She looked across the room, catching the eye of a boy in the front row, hugging a chocolate lab in a blue vest. Duke didn't just walk to save me. He walked to lead me somewhere. And today, I think I finally understand where. That moment had been coming for a long time. After years of speaking, training therapy dogs, and growing, Duke taught me. Leia had been offered a full-time government position to lead the first national initiative to integrate K-9 assisted healing programs in public schools and juvenile centers. The offer came with a full staff, a budget at headquarters, and a catch. It meant leaving Ashford, leaving her hometown, her roots, the porch where Duke once rested, the statue, the school garden, Sheriff McKay, now retired, who still waved every time she passed his house. She spent 3 weeks thinking about it. One afternoon, she walked the same trail Duke had carried her out of years ago. The woods had grown back, but the feeling remained, like the trees remembered. She knelt near the old path, whispered, "What would you do?" There was no bark in return, no paw on her leg, but in the wind that passed the pines she heard, "I'd keep walking." So she said yes. She moved to D.C., a small apartment, late nights, policy meetings, and pilot program deadlines. But for the first time, schools were seeing real change. Kids who refused to speak in therapy started to open up with a dog by their side. Teens in youth detention centers learned patience and empathy by training rescue animals. One 15-year-old girl who had survived a trafficking ring said after hugging her assigned support dog, "I didn't think I deserved love, but she keeps showing up, so maybe I do." Leia carried that quote in her wallet. Still, fame never changed her. She never chased it, never capitalized on it. If someone called her the girl from the dog story, she'd just smile and say, "You mean Duke's girl? Yeah, that's me." She kept his tag on her keychain. She told his story not as folklore, but as a reminder of what's possible, of what loyalty looks like, of what happens when you walk in the fire and come out with someone else's life in your mouth. 3 years into the program, she visited a juvenile facility in Colorado. There she met a boy named Mason. He was small for 16, quiet, avoided eye contact, refused to participate. Leia sat across from him on a wooden bench. A golden retriever named Scout curled between them. "Do you want to pet him?" she asked. Mason shook his head, but Scout didn't wait for permission. He nudged Mason's elbow with his nose. The boy jerked back, startled. Then he laughed, a tiny, raw, honest laugh. Leia didn't speak. She just watched. After a moment, Mason said, "You're the dog lady. I've been called worse." He looked at her, hesitant. "Was it scary when you were little?" She nodded. "Terrifying. But you kept going." "I did." "Why?" She smiled. "Because he did." Scout laid his head in Mason's lap. And right there, a new bond began. One Leia wouldn't see the full fruit of, but she didn't need to because she'd seen enough to know. Sometimes you plant seeds you'll never sit under, and that's okay. Back at the Capitol, she reached the end of her speech. Duke didn't need applause or medals or cameras. He needed one thing, to get me to safety. She paused. And in doing that, he gave me the chance to help thousands of others find their own path to safety, too. So to every dog, every handler, every survivor, every advocate, you are part of this walk now. Keep it going. Keep walking for the people behind you who still can't. The audience rose, clapping, cheering. Some cried. One handler saluted. The boy in the front row whispered to his dog, "You're just like Duke." That night, Leia returned to her apartment. She slipped off her shoes, set down her speech notes, and opened the sliding glass door. It was quiet outside. A soft breeze moved through the city trees. She walked to the balcony, railing, and smiled because she knew he was there, not in body, but in mission, in movement. in every child who took a deep breath, in every dog who sat calmly by someone shaking in fear, in every walk, slow or fast, that carried someone closer to peace. She whispered, "We did good, buddy." And the wind answered, "Thank you for walking with us." This story has meant so much to share. Whether you followed Leia and Duke from the first step or just join in now, thank you. Their journey is fictional, but the impact of dogs like Duke and kids like Leia is very real. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had an animal that changed your life? What did they teach you? Let us know in the comments. And if Duke's story moved you, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that love never quits and heroes don't always walk on two legs.